YouTube video friends and viewers. Please first of all subscribe to my channel, let you know my new videos. Daniel Wickwire is internet line. Welcome Daniel Wickwire. How are you?
I'm very fine, thank you.
Yes, now subject is why Israel is very important for Jesus. Jewish.
Yeah,
Jewish.
for the Jews, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, Israel is very important to the Jews because God promised to give this land to them as an eternal inheritance. Much of their history happened there, and this is where they live today. And so it has a great deal of importance to them. But it all starts in Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. And I want to read this verse for you. It said, God sent Abraham to live there. Leave the country where you were born and where your family live, and go to the land I will show you. I will make you a great nation there. So God directed Abraham to go to Israel, and but in the process of his journeying, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and their children, they all lived in Israel for most of their lives until they ended up, their descendants became slaves down in Egypt. And so when God appeared to Moses in Egypt, he said this, I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I will keep my promise with them. I will bring you, that is the Jewish people, to the land. God promised that he would bring them into the land. And certainly God keeps his word. Whenever God makes a promise, it's an eternal promise. And so God brought them into the land. And so the question is, do the Jews have a divine right to the land? Well, Israel was chosen by God from all the peoples of the world to be a focus, a special blessing in the history and the redemption, which climaxed in Jesus Christ, who is the Messiah. And in Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 6, it says this, the Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for his treasured possession out of all the peoples who are on the face of the earth. And so God promised to give this to Abraham and to his descendants as a possession forever. So this is the land which God promised. Deuteronomy 34, verse 4 says, this is the land which I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to you and your offspring. And so we know that Israel as a nation, they in November the 2nd in 1917, the British government issued the Balfour Declaration promising a homeland to the Jews. 30 years later, on November 29th, 1947, the British government placed the matter of Israel's future before the United Nations, resulting in another historic declaration, the establishment of the State of Israel. And then on May 14th, 1948, Israel as a nation was born. And actually, this was prophesied by the prophets that God would bring the Jews back into the land of Israel. Because of the Jews' disobedience, they were scattered for many hundreds and hundreds of years, but God also promised that he would bring them back as a nation into the land. And this promise was fulfilled on May 14th, 1948, when the Jews again returned to their land. And when we look at the land of Palestine, the land of Israel, we have to ask this question, well, who owns the land? Well, actually, God owns the land. God is the creator of the earth, both heavens and the earth, and it belongs to him. Psalms 24 says this, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell in it. And since God created the earth, the right ownership is his. And God says it is the land of Israel. There are several places in the Bible where God calls the land of Israel, my land. For example, in Ezekiel 38:16, God condemns the mighty Gog and Magog for the invasion of his land. It says in Ezekiel 38:16, it says, "Thou shalt come up against my people of Israel, as a cloud or to cover the land, and it shall be in the latter days, I will bring thee against my land." God calls this particular place Palestine, Israel. He says it's my land. And he repeats this in several places in the Bible. Joel 3:2. "I will also gather all nations. I will bring them down into the valley of Jehoshaphat. I will plead with them there for my people and for my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations and parted my land." Who does the land belong to? It belongs to God, and God gives it to whom he wants to. He promised that he would give it as an eternal inheritance to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That is the Jews. So when God made the covenant with Abraham, God is the absolute owner of the land, and as such, he had the right to evict the Jewish people 20 centuries ago. And he also has the right to bring them back in to the land in this generation. God is sovereign over the land. And we see this reviewed in Genesis 17, that he says, "I will establish my covenant between me and thee and thy seed after thee in their generations for an everlasting covenant, to be a God unto thee and to thy seed after thee. And I will give unto thee and to thy seed after thee the land wherein thou art a stranger, and all the land of Canaan for an everlasting possession. I will be their God." This is a very important verse in the Old Testament, in the Torah. He says that I will give this land, the land of Canaan, which is Israel, I will give it to them, that is the Jews, I will give it to them as an everlasting possession. This is what the Word of God says. And there can be no doubt that such a covenant was declared and recorded over 4,000 years ago. But what about the Arabs? They also live in that area, and they claim to be the descendants of Abraham. But the Arabs are the children of Ishmael, and so doesn't the land belong to them as well? Well, you may recall that the Arabs, they are descendants of Ishmael, while the Jews are the descendants of Abraham's other son, Isaac. So what about Isaac's inheritance? Well, this controversy was started way back then in Genesis. In Genesis chapter 24, verse 3 and 4, he says, "Sojourn in this land, and I will be with thee, and I will bless thee for unto thee and to thy seed, and I will give unto these countries, I will perform the oath which I swore unto thy father Abraham." And basically, God in these chapters, he says, I'm giving it to Isaac. I'm not giving it to Ishmael. I'm giving the land and its promises to Isaac. And so he said that this is an eternal promise, which he said, and then the land in Genesis 35, the promise is repeated. "The land which I gave Abraham and Isaac, to thee I will give it, and thy seed after thee, I will give thee the land." And so, in view of God's covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, we must understand that God has given this land to the people of Israel, to the Jews. And even though they were evicted some 2,000 years ago, God brought them back into it for his own purposes. So we see that Jesus said this in John 4:22, "Salvation is of the Jews." In other words, it's the Jews who God gave the holy books, the Torah, the Ketubim, that is the poetry books, the Nebim, the prophetical books, the New Testament, that is the 27 books of the New Testament, which record the life of Jesus, who is the Messiah. All of these things were given to us through the agency of the Jews. God put the holy books all of the hands of the Jews, and it's through this that the salvation is of the Jews, because they are the custodians, they are the protectors of the holy books. And so we see that all of these holy books were penned by Jewish men, and even the New Testament was written by the Jews, and Christ himself was a Jew.
Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Wickwire, time is out. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay.